What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm recording here live in Park City, Utah. And for those that don't know, we've got this sort of room set up with multiple podcasts going on. Me, 3-4 other guys that are doing podcasts. Just to kind of meet and greet and get to know some of the GoBundance folks out there. And my guest today is one of the guys running that podcast. I'm going to read his bio because it's pretty significant. Dr. Richard Shuster is a clinical psychologist, TEDx speaker, and CEO of Your Success Insights, which helps individuals, corporations, and athletes achieve balance and peak performance. He's also the host of The Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Shuster, Food for the Brain, Knowledge from the Experts, Tools to Win at Life, which is regularly downloaded in over 150 countries. Dr. Schuster's clinical expertise, and podcasts have been featured in publications like The Huffington Post, NBCnews.com, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, and others. He's also the president of Every Kid Rocks, Inc., a 501c3, which helps schools provide therapy services to children. Doing a lot of stuff, my friend.
A lot of stuff.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right. So yesterday we were talking, we were sitting down and chatting, or I guess standing up and chatting, just because we were between podcasts or whatever. And you mentioned a phrase that really triggered the desire for me to have you on to talk about this, because you deal with peak performance. You deal with helping people get to that next level. You have technology around work-life balance, technology around work balance, amongst other categories. But that one in particular kind of struck me. Can you explain what that means? What is technology around work-life balance?
You know, it's funny. I'm going to go back in time a bit and kind of set this up. So when I started my podcast, I was still practicing as a clinician. So my training, I'm a clinical psychologist with subspecialties in forensic and neuropsychology. And so I was working principally with sexually abused kids. And the legal system in Georgia would come to me and say, Dr. Shuster, we want you to evaluate this child and build the roadmap to put this kid back together, basically. Heavy and a big responsibility. And I would, hear some horrible stuff and go home and hug my kids really tightly every day. But I felt like I could do more, like I could have a larger impact. And so I bought one of these, bought a microphone on Amazon and decided to start a show. And nobody knew who I was. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And then one day, NBC reached out to me, and somehow a reporter had come across my show, and they said, well, you're a brain guy. We want to do some articles, a series of articles on the brain at NBC. What happens to your brain when you watch football, and what happens to your brain when you go to the beach or learn a foreign language? And so somehow, and this might have been the smartest thing I ever did outside of marrying my wife, was I had them link to my show in the article. And so all of a sudden, literally, it was just like friends and family listening to me, to everybody listening to me. And I had imposter syndrome around that. And so, these guys who were on my bookshelves, the success principles, which I had read a gazillion times, Jack Canfield's people reach out to me and they say, we want him on your show. So externally, I'm saying, well, what led you to The Daily Helping?
Right.
Inside, I'm saying, why the hell does Jack Canfield want to come on my show? But when enough of those guys started reaching out and saying the same answer, well, you're one of the bigger, influencers in personal development. Yeah. Well, the first thing I had to do was Google what an influencer was. After I did that, I was like, okay, if I'm really this guy, then I have a responsibility to leverage my platform to help as many people as I can. Sure. And so I had a background in technology. My kind of first business that I started myself was an IT company. I won a contract with the DOD when I was way too young to have anything like that happen to me. And so I understood technology. I understood assessments because that was my world as a clinician. I really wasn't a therapist. I was the assessor. And I would use empirically based tools to determine baseline levels of functioning and then use that data to build paths forward to people to get better. But I hated the industry, Jamie. It's a very greedy industry. It's pejorative.
How so? Give me. What do you mean by that? Yeah.
So it's an $8 billion or so industry, largely controlled by two companies. Many of the assessments, and you can't just go off the street and take them. Like if you wanted to take an IQ test or a measure on substance abuse, you couldn't do it. Right. There are gatekeepers in place where you have to get access to them. So a lot of times people who need access to resources can't get them. And even if they could get them, they couldn't afford them. You'd have to pay somebody like me $3,000 to $5,000 to make sense of it to you, right? Right. And then beyond that, many of the tools that exist are designed really to show what's wrong with people.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be the Michael Dell of this space. And I was very intentional about that because he was such a disruptor in the PC space, which I knew very well from my earlier days in IT work. And so I built this technology company on 4 pillars. That one, everything I built was going to be affordable and accessible. 2, I was going to do everything algorithmically based so that the things would be self-scoring and self-interpreting. So you didn't need a middleman. You didn't need a high-level consultant, or you didn't need a doctor to make sense of the data to you.
Sure.
3, we were going to highlight what was awesome about people as well as their roadblocks. And 4, I was going to reward people financially who helped me help others. And so we got started in trauma. That was our first place, was trauma for veterans, trauma for first responders. We then moved into addiction recovery. I've got the only instrument in the world that not only helps people find those resiliency factors likely to keep them sober, but also can address things like the impact of racial discrimination on their addiction. Very, very unique in the space. We're doing a lot with peak performance and athletes from as young as the 6th grade all the way up to the professional levels, talent retention and corporations. And we were good, right? I was so happy with our verticals. In fact, I remember a conversation with JJ Virgin after she came on my show the second time. And she said, stay out of the consumer marketplace. It's too much of a mess. Stick with what you're doing. Stay in these other places. And so the work-life balance thing came about after something that happened to me in June of 2020. And so to kind of set the backstory for that, I was killing it. I was literally at the top of my game. I had just had my 2 best consecutive quarters ever. And this is like in the midst of the early pandemic when we were still Lysoling our kids and our groceries, right? And so, I just did my first TED Talk, and like everything was on all cylinders. And so I go to bed about 2 a.m. I wake up and I didn't feel right. Something was not right with me. And so instinctively, I ripped the pillow out from under my wife's head. My wife is a very wonderful Southern girl from Charleston, and Southern girls love their sleep. And she was, I won't say the word she used, but she was not happy with me when I ripped out her pillow. And what I should have said was, something's wrong, I need help. The words that came out of my mouth were, I'm sorry. And she rolled her eyes and went back to bed. And so I went back to bed, not knowing what had happened to me. 3 hours later, and this is probably what was one of 2 things in this journey that saved my life, our puppy started barking. Yep, 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 yep. He's in his cage and he's barking. And so we were trying to crate train this dog unsuccessfully, I might add. And so it was my shift, right? And so I get out of bed and I'm not quite steady. And, we were joking about this beforehand, like I'm not super athletic anyway, but I was less coordinated than usual.
Sure.
And so I get downstairs and the dog had chosen to relieve himself in the cage. And that's a 2-person job, right?
Yeah.
So I get back up the stairs and I tell my wife what happened. She shoots up immediately. You're slurring your words. I am? Huh, okay. Well, so that's interesting. And so it still didn't dawn on me, like what had really happened. We get downstairs, we get the dog, carry the dog to the front of the house. And I put him on the leash and I pull out my cell phone because it's the middle of, it's 5:30 in the morning and I can't see anything. I was going to turn on my flashlight. And I realized, Jamie, I had no idea how to use that cell phone.
Wow.
And that's when it hit me like the kid in The Sixth Sense, like all the clues are there. Boom. Unsteady. Boom. My speech is slurred. Boom. I don't know how to use the cell phone. Holy shit. I've had a stroke.
Yeah.
And now I'm realizing not only have I had a stroke, I had the stroke at 2:30 in the morning or so.
When you said, I'm sorry.
And so I realized that my brain had been bleeding for about 3 hours.
Jeez.
And so now panic is starting to set in because this is what I do, right?
Brain
like
dead.
I understand this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we grab the kids and throw them in the car and they're confused and they're upset and my wife is crying. We drive to the nearest hospital and she drops me off because they don't let you in, right? They had a plastic tent with a woman in a hazmat suit. And basically it's kind of like, you have to sell yourself on why you need to get into the hospital. I said, well, I'm pretty sure I've had a stroke. And she asked me my symptoms and I said the stuff. And so they took me into the COVID part of the hospital and they stuck the thing all the way up my nose to my brain. And then they're like, all right, you don't have COVID. And they let me in. They gave me a CAT scan. The ER doctor comes and asks me a few questions. And then he said, well, I'll come back when the CAT scan comes back.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
CAT scans are interesting. There's different kinds of strokes, and they don't always show the kind of stroke that I had.
Yeah.
So he has this data, and he says, well, good news, young man, you didn't have a stroke. I'm discharging you. And I said to him, what? And people who know me know that I'm generally not an in-your-face, kind of a guy. But in that moment, I heard like Yoda, like the voice of my first supervisor at my first job as a salesperson when I was 23, saying, like, if you're going to give somebody an ultimatum, you look them in the eyes and you don't say anything, because whoever talks first is the one that most times will give in. And so I looked at this guy and I said to him, I said, listen to me very carefully. And I pointed at him.
Yeah.
I said, I know more about stroke than anybody in this room. I've trained at the Cleveland Clinic. I said, you know damn well that an ischemic stroke might not show on a CT, but an embolic will. An embolic stroke just basically means like a big giant clot whereas an ischemic stroke is much more focalized.
Sure.
And so I said, you're going to give me an MRI and you're going to get me blood thinners and you're going to do it right now.
Right.
And I just stared at him. And everybody in the room was tense. It was like this Old West kind of cut light. It was exactly what it was like. And he rolled his eyes. He said, okay, I'll give you your MRI. And the stroke, there's a part of your brain called the basal ganglia, and it's involved with speech and motor movement. So if you see people with really advanced Parkinson's,
sure,
that's the part of the brain that gets impacted. So when the MRI came back and it showed the stroke, I missed my basal ganglia by less than a millimeter.
Wow, man.
That's the difference between me being here and me not. It was that close.
Yeah.
And so by the time they got me fully admitted in the blood thinners, the damage was kind of done. My speech at that point was pretty impaired. There was the whole left side of my face had this droop. My hands didn't work right. Like I couldn't use the voice assistant on my phone because it couldn't understand me. And even though in my mind, I did remember, oh yeah, you use your thumbprint to access the phone.
Yeah.
I couldn't text because in my mind, I knew the words I was trying to type, but my thumbs just couldn't hit anywhere near these letters. And so now, at first, you go through these different waves of emotions. I'm fighting for my life. Like I'm defending myself that, look, I think I've had a stroke and you need to do these things to fix me.
Yeah.
But once I saw the actual MRI, then it's a different thing. And then you start wondering, well, what does this mean? Is my, can I podcast ever again? Right. Am I going to be able to have a livelihood? What, you have no idea. And I'm sitting there, I'm lying, crying in this hospital bed. Like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And then they take me to the room and they start doing the treatment. And that first night was really scary. They come to check on you every 4 hours, but a lot can happen in 4 hours.
Sure, yeah.
And what a lot of people don't realize, it's the stroke is not usually what kills you. It's usually strokes are kind of like earthquakes. There's like these aftershocks, right? These things that happen after the fact. That's how Luke Perry died. It wasn't the first stroke that killed Luke Perry. It was these after effects of the stroke. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that night, I didn't sleep. I was too afraid to go to sleep. I didn't think I would wake up. And so I'm holding this picture on my phone that I had scrolled through to. It took me a while to get to the picture just because mechanically my hands weren't great. But I had this picture of my puppy and my wife and my 2 kids, and I just stared at this picture all night long, saying, just stay alive, stay alive. And I made it, right, to the next morning. Obviously, I'm here. And then, like the way I'm kind of wired is like when something bad happens to me, I have like my few minutes in that crisis. And then when I'm after it, like the next day, it's like cue the Rocky montage, like I'm ready to kick this thing in the ass.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I began my recovery, and I did fully recover, and quickly. I would literally visualize. I know that you've got your tribe of millionaires here, and Hal wrote the foreword to your book. Hal's been on my show a couple of times, and I've been on his. And The Miracle Morning was a book that really changed my life, and visualization is something that is so amazing and that I believe in so thoroughly. And I literally would spend 8 to 12 hours a day with my eyes closed, seeing my brain rewire like an old telephone switchboard.
8 to 12 hours
doing nothing,
a day.
Nothing but seeing. What else did I have to do, right?
I guess.
And seeing the neurons in my brain rewiring.
Wow.
Visualizing myself, I would say to myself, I am better than I was before, and seeing myself on stage again and everything. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I went from where I was to what I am now. And when
Holy crap.
when
Yeah.
that was over, the doctor, because I was young, and so when you think about people who have stroke, you think about people that are 300 pounds and that are smoking and all these things. Like, I should not have had a stroke physically. Like, I had my morning routine. I worked out 7 days a week, sometimes twice a day. I ate only organic foods I prepared myself. I had my whole meditation and gratitude practice, and
You're
like,
checking every box.
right.
Yeah.
So I thought, right. And so they sent me to oncologists. Oh, he's got to have cancer. Or maybe it's his thyroid. Let's send him to the endocrinologist. Like, I went to every ologist, Jamie. And I recognize this is the longest answer you've probably ever gotten to a question.
This is great. There's a couple of things I want to extract from it, but please keep going. Please keep
I
going.
appreciate your latitude in letting me tell the story. And so when all the data came back, and I went with my wife to the neurologist to kind of get the recap.
Yeah.
And he's there and he's going over everything. He goes, well, Richard, all of your test results are negative. Well, that's good news, But he said, let me ask you something. Excuse me. He said, let me ask you a question. How many hours a week do you work? And I said, well, doc, let me stop you right there. I don't really work at all. He goes, oh. He said, oh, did you win the lottery? Rich grandma? Like, what was the deal? I said, no, you misunderstand me. I work for myself and I love what I do.
Yeah.
So it's not really work. And it pissed him off.
Yeah.
Right. And so he said,
you're good at pissing off doctors, I've noticed.
I am. Yeah, I have a lengthy habit of that. Yes. And so he said to me, he was mad. He says, Richard, let me ask, how many hours a week do you love what you do? Right.
What a great question.
Isn't that good? Right.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was a perfect retort. And I said to him, about 80.
Holy cow, man.
And he said to me, well, this is what I'm going to tell you, and you can do whatever you want with this information. He said, stress caused your stroke. I don't care if you love what you do. Work is work.
That's the word I wrote down here.
And the odds of what happened to you and you being how you are now are astronomical, that you're here and okay and, relatively perfectly functioning. It will happen again, or you'll have a heart attack. You need to change your lifestyle. And my wife puts her head in her hands, starts to cry. He'll never stop working, doctor. He's an animal, right? And so in that moment, I committed to God and, the doctor and my wife. I said, all right, 25 hours a week max for the rest of my life. That's it.
Wow.
And I didn't know how I was going to do it.
Yeah.
But I knew I was going to have that commitment. And so, that's a separate
Well, why
piece.
why 25 real quick?
I don't know.
Just came to you.
It just came to me.
Okay.
That's the number
Fair
that
enough.
popped into my
That's
head.
fine.
Like, there was it wasn't like I had done, a full literature review to see what the data suggested. Like, it was 25 just popped in there.
Got it.
And so, I when I went back to work and said to my team, I said, remember when I said we were never really going to be in the consumer space? I said, I lied. And I said, we're going to create the world's first empirically validated assessment on work-life balance. And I want to be the cautionary tale. I don't want what happened to me to ever happen to anybody else. Because, my TED Talk was about, my origin story, like, Richard 2.0, basically, where I was like this, real young prick who won that government contract at the age of 24. And then I broke my spine in a car accident.
Jeez, man.
And again, like, doctors told me, well, you're probably not going to do this and this. And I, told them no. And, I do all those things. But, it was this next thing that has defined who I am now, because I think, we as entrepreneurs, we use the journey, we use what we're building to romanticize and justify stupid things we do, right? Like, we can say to ourselves, I'm building this business to create a legacy and financial security for my wife and kids, to make the world a better place. And so that's the rationale in our minds that we use to work till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. That's what I did every night. Like, I'm up at 5:30, I'm doing my morning stuff, right? And I hit it hard all day. I'd stop when the kids came home. I wasn't an absent parent. Like, officially, I was there at the dinner table, but like, I'm checking my phone, during dinners when messages are coming in. Like, this was a path to destruction that I just narrowly avoided. And so I built that piece of technology, that algorithmically based tool, to help people understand where they are
Mm.
and to be able to better take control of their lives. And I've built a whole set of systems. This is what my book's going to be about when it comes out this year. A whole set of systems that I use, that I taught myself to go from the 80 to 25 and be more productive and actually make more money than I was when I was working 80.
So now I want to talk about a couple of those things. Well, I want to get into the work-life assessment. Let's go back to the vision first, if we could, please.
Yeah.
You're a doctor,
Yep.
right? Dr. Richard. You know the brain.
Yes.
You visualize the neurons 8, 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
That sounds like woo-woo science to a lot of people, right? And I'll be honest with you, before I kind of, set down the path of personal development myself, it always felt like a visualization. But man, I am fully bought in on it. Is there, I don't know, talk about visualization for a moment. Maybe there's something even scientific, really smart, doctory stuff that you're going to say. I don't know. But talk about visualization. Why is it so powerful? Why is it impactful? Maybe you have some reasons that you've discovered in your time. I don't know. I feel compelled to go there with you right now.
No, it's a great question. And, I don't want to steal Hal's thunder because this is his thing too.
Sure.
Visualization is really interesting because the brain can't differentiate what you're seeing in your mind's eye, so to speak, from reality. So there was a really cool study, and I don't remember what year this was done, but they took 2 high school basketball teams. And these were, not teams of kids that were going to play D1 basketball at Michigan State or Duke. These were just average kids that played basketball, right? And were probably never going to do anything beyond that. And so Group A they'd practice and do their thing like normal. Group B, they would visualize before every game. They'd close their eyes and they'd practice shooting free throws. They'd see themselves, the ball in their brain, the ball going in over and over again, consistently. And they track these 2 teams over the course of the whole season. And again, it's not like Team B had, 90% free throw shooters and we're just there. Team B consistently shot free throws at a radically higher rate than Team A. They've done examples with runners where they have visualized them, finishing at a certain time, and they finish at a certain time. So the mind does not care. Like if you're feeding it good, you're feeding it good. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, which basically is kind of like radar. Like think about, the Terminator. Remember that scene where Arnold or the Terminator was in the bar and then he was scanning the environment, right?
Yep.
So that's what your reticular activating system does. It looks for things in your environment to pull towards whatever you're focused on. So if you're visualized and focused on really amazing things happening to you, that's what you're pulling towards you. A great example I like to use in describing this is, let's say you get a new car. Let's say you get Jamie gets a brand new Toyota Camry, right? Isn't that fun? If you're a down-to-earth guy, you want a Toyota Camry.
Yeah.
And so you're rocking down, the highway in your Toyota Camry, driving up there in Michigan on I-94, wherever you are. And so 96, I'm sorry. It's been a while since I've been up there.
Yeah.
And so it's not, and you're now noticing all the Toyota Camrys on the car or on the road, right?
Yeah.
It's not that all of a sudden there's more Camrys on the road, but your mind is bringing awareness to that.
Yeah.
Now the other piece, with respect to the healing piece, it's interesting. So the woo-woo stuff. Now I'm not a quantum physicist, okay? So that's beyond the scope of what I can intelligently speak about. That's a little bit more Joe Dispenza than me.
Sure. Yeah.
But he had kind of a similar deal, right? And so we're learning more all the time. But what we used to think was woo-woo and hippies and crystals and nonsense, there is actually science behind it.
Sure.
And so, the power of the mind, is really quite remarkable. And, for me, I was already, when this happened, entrenched in a heavy visualization process. And so it was kind of easy for me to go there. In fact, I saw it. I was like, okay, I'm taking control of my healing. I am 100% going to get there. And this is how I'm going to do it. I didn't know I would do it in 2 weeks.
Sure.
Admittedly, that was kind of nuts,
Were you visualizing outcome or process though? I wonder about
both.
that. And do you recommend that, or have you done that? Because I think I visualize in my practice.
Most people do outcomes. Everybody does outcomes.
Yeah.
They see themselves, having the house or having the zeros in the bank account. I historically have done outcomes too.
Sure.
But in this instance, it was both. And, maybe that made a big difference.
Do you do that now?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to, keynote, and it's a keynote that's big and I want to I always try and do a good job. But
Only on the big ones.
Right.
The little ones,
screw it. Yeah, no. But I'll see myself, going through parts of that speech like it's happening, right? Like I'm walking on the stage and, I've really nailed the audience's attention or something. So there are instances, but I really, and it's funny because you pointed out, and I never really thought about it in the context of having this in vivo, in the moment / outcome driven visualization. But you know what? You've given me a modification to my visualization techniques. But
you've given me that, honestly, by talking about going through the neurons, right?
But I never thought about it in that context. It just was the natural thing for me to see because I knew, and there is a term, it's a concept known of it's called neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And essentially what the brain does is and it's not just strokes, it can be anything. When something happens to the brain's amazing. The brain will find a way to create new neural pathways, and it does it automatically. But I mean, that was where I was visualizing. I was really adding a dimension of meaning to the neuroplasticity and kind of in my mind seeing it happen in real time.
How quickly did you go from 80 hours a week to 25 hours a week? Was it immediate?
Yeah.
Okay. You're writing a book. You've got a consumer product now. You've got this team you're managing, everything else. How are you doing that in 25 hours? Do you, and I mean, I guess part and parcel with that question, I hate asking two in a row, but I'm kind of going to do it. How do you do it? And I wonder, does it get harder to do it the further away from the stroke that you get? Does that make sense? Like the further that memory of this event is in the past, does it pull on like, what's 26 hours this week?
It didn't to me.
Okay.
Because one, I made a commitment to my wife and I wanted to be here for my kids.
Yeah.
I've used a few of my 9 lives already, for sure. And
sounds like it. Yeah.
Maybe I've got 6 left. I don't know. But I definitely, thought it had me rethinking. Now, admittedly, when I was sitting down on day one, I'm like, okay, like I'm a 25 a week guy. Like I had no idea what that was going to look like. But I knew that there were some things that I had to do immediately. So number one was I had to get very granular about my time, almost obsessive about my time. And so before the stroke happened, like if you had reached out to me on LinkedIn, I almost, no matter who you were, probably, if there was a business opportunity that came, I'd take that call. Let's set up a Zoom and let's do it. And so I was like, a LinkedIn junkie, setting up meetings with everybody. And so the first thing I did was I thought about how do I govern my time better? And so I created a filter. And the filter goes like this. And everybody's filter is different. But the filter for me is if I'm going to have a meeting with somebody's going to get on my calendar. Do they care more about helping people than they care about revenue? Mm. If they don't get that, they're going automatically, right?
Makes sense.
B, are they the Batman to my Robin? Are they the chocolate to my peanut butter? Can what they've created and what I've created in concert be better together than they are by themselves?
Yeah.
And then if we get those two, because, we're still generating revenue and that's the best way to impact the world is to make a lot of money, right?
Sure.
Does the merging of our two things, like can a joint venture or partnership in some way, can our stuff together represent an 8-figure opportunity for both of us?
An 8-figure opportunity. Yeah.
It used to be 7. Mm. I've upped it.
Good for you.
And I added the 0 before I even knew the GoBundance terminology, right?
Not us. That's Mark Moses, but yeah.
Okay. And so that's right. It was Mark Moses. So, and so that remarkably pared down who could get on my schedule.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I did.
Yeah.
And immediately that gave me a ton of time back. And in general, like my approach to time is now I've gamified time. So for example, if you go to the grocery store, here's a good example. And then there's a bag of onions for you get 2 pounds of onions for $4, right?
Yeah.
Whatever onions cost. And then there's, in the refrigerated section, a little box of diced onions. And, like that's like half of an onion for like $3.
Yeah.
What's the better buy?
Well, the time versus energy.
Exactly,
Right? Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so before the stroke, I would probably have bought the onions in the
Yeah.
big bag, and because I love cooking, that's one of my things. And so that's one way. Like I'm looking everywhere.
I got to have you talk to my wife, because she's the opposite, and it drives me up a wall. Like, it'll be like delivering groceries is $9. It's like, it's $9. Just have them
Right.
deliver the groceries. Well, it's
Right.
easy if I go to the store. It's a half hour of your time,
That's right.
40 minutes
That's
of your
right.
time, right?
And so, it's like, okay, so now, like I started listening to audiobooks,
Yeah.
when I'm on my bike, instead of just sitting down and reading a book. Like that's combining two things. And then I kind of like find ways that I can track that, and it's like, oh, cool. Like I saved all this time. Like when you look at your receipt at the grocery store, and because you bought stuff on sale, this is how much money you saved.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that and I'm always fanatical about time. The other thing that I did, which was, excuse me, really important, is everybody's got a number, right? Like you guys do this as part of the abundance thing in the one sheet, is you figure out your net worth and your, these percentages of these different various things. At the end of the day, you need to know how much money you need.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I'm talking to an audience where everybody's got these horizontal, income investments, and that's really great. But at the end of the day, once you hit your number, then you have to really think about beyond that. What are you giving up in the work that you have to put forth to generate the extra, right? And particularly if it's vertical income, if it's a business that you're involved in, are you giving up time? And if you give up that time, what does that mean? Does that mean one less session on the treadmill, one less date with your wife, one less, family game night with your kids? What does it mean? And so be very clear on what that cost is. For me, once I knew that number, it became very easy for me to say, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, right? And so I can really hone in further on how to best spend the time. And the next thing that I did was I created this system. I call them my 4Ds, right?
4Ds.
4Ds.
Okay.
And so they're do, delegate, delay, or drop. So if you have an activity that's placed in front of you, if it's a really mission critical and only you can do it, do it. If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no, right? But if it's a hell no, then it can go down these other things. Is it something that's mission critical, but it doesn't have to be done today?
Right.
Delay. Right? If it's mission critical, but you could hire a VA to do it, delegate.
Sure.
And if it's just a waste of time, drop it. So that further helped me really take my hours down and be much more focused on what I'm doing. And the delegate in particular is important because I then became more, I've always been of the mindset, and this was like the Larry Bird mindset, where I can do this better than anybody else because I know it's me, it's my stuff. I learned to give up stuff and to trust, bring in good people, but trust that I can have other people do the stuff that I only thought that I could do myself. And so by putting all of these things into place, it has changed everything, right? Like the quality of the people who get on my schedule. Now, if somebody meets two of the three, they might be my friend. We might watch a football game together, right? But there's no way in hell they're getting on my work calendar.
Gotcha.
And so I've really narrowed these things down, and it's been awesome because now I stop working at 2:00, and from 2 to 3:30, that's just my time. It's selfish time. And so if there's a movie on Netflix I want to watch, or, like I do competitive barbecue, so I might be tinkering with a sauce recipe or something. Like
a whole other podcast.
It is, right? Like I'd love to have a barbecue podcast with you. So it's, because what happens then at 3:30, my kids come home and then it's homework. And then we decide what we're going to have for dinner. We cook the dinner as a family. That's really fun. Like my kids are 8 and 6, so they do different things that are age appropriate to help prep the meal.
Sure.
And bath time and story time. And then Fridays are just for me and my wife. And what is really cool is by carving out a piece of my day, and it sounds counterintuitive at first, like, well, you've got this really finite amount of schedule and you've built in time for just like playing games and nonsense. Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Because I'm more present as a dad. I'm more present as a husband. I've uninstalled my work email app from my phone. Like, if there's something significant, like, my people know how to get a hold of me, right?
Sure.
But it's so liberating to do that. And I would encourage you, you guys are going to feel like, going through a little bit of withdrawal, right? Like, what's going on in my business? It's so cool to just sit there at dinner and not think about anything but the four of us, my wife and my kids, and sitting there. And, so it's, the stroke was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm really grateful for it.
But it doesn't have to happen to everybody.
Well,
to
that's the
change their
thing, right?
lives,
Like,
Yeah.
when I would go on stage, like when I did my TEDx, and I would talk about my car accident story and how that changed, my focus from being a brick to, focusing on helping others. People watch that, Jamie, and like, well, that's a really cool story. Nobody in their right mind would hear me say that and then be like, oh, geez, if I don't become more altruistic like this guy, I'm going to break my back in a car accident too, right? It's insanity to even propose that. But when I talk to a business owner and I say what happened, their eyes get big like silver dollar pancakes because it's relatable. Because who listening to this hasn't worked more hours than they should? Right? We've all done it. And so, it's created a whole new platform for me that I'm so excited about. And then I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs, and it's so in line with what you guys are doing at GoBundance, right? It's being able to live the quality of life, be a good dad, give back, do all of these things. But you really can only do that if you're managing your time.
100%. Wow, man. Wow. I would love to go deep into the work-life balance assessment and all of that stuff, but why don't you do this for me? So, I want to learn where people can find this, obviously, but before you go there, give us just a couple of nuggets. So if I'm interested, like, this sounds interesting, the story's compelling, I'm going to go do this thing. Like, give me an idea of the outcome that I get if I go through the assessment. Does that make sense? Like, what does it tell me? What does it teach me?
So basically what this is going to do is give you a roadmap. You guys love roadmaps.
We do.
Yeah, you do. So basically what this does is it empirically looks at 21 dimensions that are associated with success in life. Not success in work, success in life. Your relationship with your spouse, your, relationship with money, how you interact with people, how you handle stress. And so what it does is then the algorithm will take that data and interpret that on a whole lot of different points and give you a very customized blueprint of what that looks like. And so from that, you've got essentially what's like this 35-page guidebook, so to speak, where you learn about yourself. Now, we're doing something really cool with this, and this was really, really good customer feedback we've gotten. This group, I think, would get the assessment. Consumers in general, we found, had gotten a little bit confused by it, and not confused by what the data is, but, they don't understand the difference between, a scientifically rigorously constructed tool like we've got and the, teen people, what Game of Thrones character are you kind of quiz that they could take online.
Sure.
And so, in our messaging, we've made some changes there. And what we've also done, and we're going live with, I don't know when this is going to air, it might be live by the time it is, but we've created a course, we're calling it the Take Control of Your Life course, which focuses on cognitive behavior therapy training and neuroscience to help you reframe those cognitive distortions. And I think this group is probably, so far ahead of the game in terms of that. That's really more for kind of the general public. But yeah, if you want to just check out the tool by itself,
please.
It's at seekyourpowers.com.
Seekyourpowers.com.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Wow, man. Amazing. Incredible story. We didn't even get into the backbreaking story. We'll go watch the TEDx talk for that, it sounds like, right? Where should people follow you, learn more about you, your products, your company, everything?
Yeah, sure. So the mothership is drrichardschuster.com. And because my name is often misspelled, I bought every possible domain configuration of my mail. I'll point to the right. Right. So, but the actual one is drrichard, SHUSTER.com. And that has the links to my company, my charity. It has the links to my podcast, The Daily Helping. Everything's there.
Beautiful. Dr. Richard, amazing, man. So glad we did this.
Me too, man. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.